Hi, everyone. This is Edan Maybon of LightCycleAstrology.com. Welcome back to the channel, friends. Today, we are taking a look at the astrology for August 2023. And so this is the astrological overview of the month ahead here. It's a pretty interesting month. We have two full moons within 1 month. We have Mars's entrance into the sign of Libra, which really changes the vibe a little bit. And of course, the big part of the month is all about the Venus retrograde that is now underway. And for the most part, we will see most of the action for this year's Venus retrograde taking place in the month of August. Of course, the second part of that spills on over into the month of September, but a big part of the meat of this Venus retrograde is happening this month. We also have kind of that summertime fill with a bunch of sun aspects, the sun's entrance into the last sign within the summer month. So it's a pretty interesting month, and we'll take a look at the major aspects today so that we have a kind of an overview of what's coming ahead. Before we do, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit notifications so you don't miss any videos. You can always leave any comments that you are inspired to leave or want to share. That's my favorite part, is seeing your guys' comments. And you can always go to my website, lightcycleastrology.com, if you ever want to get a hold of me for a reading, if you feel like you need more astrological guidance in your life. Okay, well, let's go ahead now and we'll pull up the real-time clock and take a look at the beginning of the month here. So on August 1st, the big thing that happens right away is that we are getting a full moon in the sign of Aquarius. And this full moon in Aquarius, we get one full moon in Aquarius per year. This particular full moon is in an aversion to the moon's host, which is going to be Saturn in the sign of Pisces next door. So in other words, one characteristic of a full moon is always to look to the host of the moon, that the sign that the moon is in, and is there reception between the host and the full moon? If there's not reception, then it can feel a little bit like the moon is disconnected, and you do have kind of that feeling a little bit because we have the moon running through a sign that is a Saturn-ruled sign, and as a father of a child that has not a full moon in Aquarius, but has almost a full moon in Aquarius. One thing that is interesting about Aquarius moons, just in general, for me, in my experience with my child, is definitely that there is sometimes a pretty big disconnect with the body, which is interesting because the moon is a planet that can represent or symbolize the body. So one thing that might kind of come up in certain ways is almost like a disconnection with the body. Now, that isn't always a bad thing, but for instance, with my son, it just means that he's a little bit more clumsy, or he trips a lot or things like that sometimes because he just doesn't have that natural instinct or that natural insight into moving the body and all sorts of things like that. That is just something that doesn't come naturally to him. So that's part of the beginning signature of the month of August, which is kind of interesting. But some other keywords that you might throw in there with the full moon in Aquarius is words like populism, social hierarchy, social boundaries, detachment, pragmatic collectivism, revolutionary, power to the people. That's a big one for an Aquarius full moon. Experimental, scientific, show off, important individualism, self-aggrandization, and unique importance. These are all some of the key words that sort of characterize a full moon in Aquarius. Okay, and then by the time we get to August the 2nd here, if we roll the clock forward, we are going to get a Mercury oppose Saturn this month. And some of the key words that you might associate with this aspect could be things like fixed perspectives versus adaptable cleverness, or stubbornness versus flexibility. And that's, of course, just because we have this exalted Mercury right now, which is an incredible place for Mercury. It's the best place in the zodiac for Mercury to be in. It's one of his temples, but it also has the double designation of being not only one of Mercury's temples, but also Mercury's place of exaltation. So Mercury is very, very natural in the sign of Virgo. And as that natural Mercury comes into a something that is opposite to himself, in the form of Saturn in Pisces, there is an interesting dynamic or tension at play there. So you have things like fixed perspectives that are in opposition to Mercury's adaptable cleverness, or Saturn's stubbornness versus Mercury's flexibility, things like that. So you could get things like struggling to hold on to what used to save you, while instinctually knowing it's time to harvest what works and discard what doesn't work. And that's because, Virgo is always concerned with looking ahead towards the dark half of the year that is soon to begin at the cusp of the when the sun enters Libra, right? From the beginning of Libra to the end of Pisces, we have the dark half of the year. And Mercury really takes that job seriously. So you get all of these qualities in Virgo, like helpfulness and cleverness and preparedness and things like that. So you get kind of one energy on one side of the balance is trying to be helpful and preparing and things like that. And then you get that sometimes melancholic Saturn in the sign of Pisces that is a weird mix, because I would say it's emotional. It's an emotional kind of Saturn. And when Saturn isn't typically emotional, but one emotion that Saturn is known for sort of representing is that kind of melancholy or angst, especially in the sign of Pisces. So you get that kind of tension between maybe feeling like you are struggling to hold on to something that used to save you. Saturn in the sign of Jupiter is all about saving things or being redemptive. But Mercury's instinct is to sort of say, well, let's harvest. And in harvesting, you have to judge. You have to figure out what is wheat and what is chaff, because you're going to get rid of the chaff, right? So there is that kind of interesting dynamic, struggling to hold on to what used to save you, just that instinct to sort of want to hold on to a spring that is coming for Saturn. And Mercury saying, we are way past that. It might be time to figure out what is useful and what isn't useful. So another way that this might express is holding on to a faith of the past versus seeing things for what they actually are. That's something else that maybe could be part of that. Okay, and if we roll the clock forward now to August the 7th, excuse me. If we roll the clock forward to August the 3rd, this is getting into the meat and potatoes of the Venus retrograde that is happening now. And this is all about Venus going through different levels into the underworld by this point. She's already, by the beginning of the month, Venus is already stationed, and she's just beginning to barely move backwards through the zodiac, which is, going to have an initial weird feeling to it, because we're used to planets going forward, and we're used to time feeling like it's moving in this certain way. So part of the changeover with Venus is sort of that lag and slow down and then reversal. But we are in that as the month opens here. And so by August the 3rd, though, one part of this is that you'll notice that the sun is at almost 11 degrees of Leo, and Venus is at about 26 degrees of Leo. And so between the sun and Venus, there's about 15 degrees. Now, this is kind of a general statement when I say that Venus is moving into invisibility. But essentially what this means is that it's around this time. It might be a day before, it might be a day after this, but around 15 degrees of separation between Venus and the sun is when this is going to be Venus as an evening star. So let me just show you what I mean by that. If I roll the clock forward by hours instead of days, watch the sun. The sun rises at about 6:20 a.m. I have the real-time clock set to London time just to be kind of centralized here. But the sun rises moves into the 10th house by, of course, around noontime, locally speaking. And look, Venus is to the left of the sun. So what that means is as the sun arcs overhead during the day and then begins to fall into the west, heading towards sunset, once the sun gets down, here's the sun by the descendant at around 6:20. Now this is summertime, just past the summer solstice, so you get long days, right? But let me just advance it by minutes now. As soon as the sun goes down, and in the chart, you're going to see the horizon is represented by this DS, the western sunset horizon. Like if you were at the ocean and you were watching the sunset on a nice summer night. There we go, right there. Sunset if you're in London, and if it's clear out, I know that London doesn't always have clear weather, but just imagine that you're in London and you're at the beach and it's clear and you just watch the sun go down. Well, about an hour after that, darkness begins to, or about an hour after that, the light of the day begins to empty out of the sky and the stars are popping out one by one. But here is Venus only about 15 degrees up in the sky, ahead of that western horizon. So what that means is that there isn't enough time between the sun going down and Mercury setting. Mercury sets pretty near the sun's set. So if Venus sets pretty near the sunset. So if Venus is higher up, like where you see Mars and Mercury now, you will see Mercury as an evening star. I saw Mercury as an evening star last night, and it was really pretty. It was very, very clear here in Hawaii, and I got to see the mountain. And Mercury is really hard, and it's sometimes unique to see Mercury because Mercury's light isn't as bright. Venus's light is really, really bright, but still, nonetheless, that brightness of her light doesn't pierce through the residual daylight that is still fading, and it just doesn't have enough time for Venus to for Venus's light to pierce through whatever residual light is in the sky after sunset before she goes underneath the horizon as well. So you can see that about 7:42. So it's roughly an hour. It takes just a little bit longer than that. So this is the moment during the Venus retrograde cycle where Venus loses visibility. And so, of course, what does that mean? Well, whatever Venus could represent symbolically in astrology, whether that's love, beauty, pleasure, harmony, friendship, just things that are just social, things going smoothly, general good fortune or luck, aesthetics, art, music, creativity. Venus in Leo is going to be concerned with things that are very, very important and central, that has that sort of central solar quality to it. So relationships that are very central, doing things that are important to yourself as an individual, because the sun is an individualist. So these types of things are characterizing Venus in the sign of Leo. And it's like those things are going into the underworld and they're not seen. So they have a harder time manifesting. So for instance, let's say that just as for an example, you're involved in, this is kind of a silly example, but let's say that you're doing like a play at this time with friends or something, or you're doing like improv, stand-up comedy. I had a friend who used to do this. This could be one of those moments where you have maybe even potentially a really, really good act or performance or something like that, and you get up on the stage and you're ready to shine and be, Venus in Leo, and it just doesn't quite land or something. So, it's things like that. It's whatever Venus is trying to make happen, or whatever she's representing that we're trying to make happen. It doesn't land. It falls on deaf ears. It's not visible. It doesn't work out. It's just a little bit harder for Venus to enact her symbolic meaning when she loses visibility, because we can't see her in the sky anymore, right? So it's like there's a disconnect there. So that happens on August the 3rd. And this is just the natural progression for Venus to go into the underworld. At this point, it's like she enters the gates of the underworld, and she will go through a metaphorical death, and it will get more and more intense as time goes on until she reaches that midpoint in the Sun conjunct Venus cazimi, where she is reborn and heads towards becoming visible and all of that. So that's sort of the cycle that we're entering this month. So that's a pretty interesting part of the month for sure. Now, if we roll the clock forward to August the 7th, we get a Sun square Jupiter. And this is characterized by belief in your desires, trust in your instincts, and having faith in the goodness of the world. And that's, of course, because we get those, Sun and Jupiter qualities together are big. They're bold. They're extroverted. Jupiter brings in the sophist, or the belief, or the just the general good faith, or something like that. And of course, the Sun is central. So it's really tapping into some of those more optimistic kinds of things, even though this is a square. So the square part, squares were said in ancient astrology to be of the nature of Mars. That Marsy energy between those two planets can really come up if it's like you push your beliefs or ideas on other people, especially if those other people happen to be like solar kinds of people that are somehow have authority in your life or something like that. So, standing up for what you believe in at work is may bring the wrath of kind of a ruler over you, or it might have a good positive effect that Jupiter comes in and says, "Hey, I'm glad you told me what's up. You want to raise? Let's see what we can do." So it has a tension to it, but generally Sun square Jupiters, those are pretty positive aspects. So belief in your ideas, trust in your instincts, have faith in the goodness of the world. Those are some of the qualities that may be coming in at that time. Okay, if we roll the clock forward to August the 8th now, just the next day, we get an exalted last quarter moon conjunct Jupiter. So this is kind of in line with that energy. But I really, really love this aspect coming in at the beginning of the month here. Let me just roll the clock back a few hours here. So there we go. Okay, so August the 8th, look at how the moon is between Jupiter and Uranus. So that's kind of a wild energy, and it's a last quarter moon. So we bring in sort of what our last quarter moons generally about. They're generally about, sometimes they can be rebellious because they're generally about trying to release or let go, walk away, lose, what's the right way to say it? You sort of lose interest, I guess you might say, in what has been represented at the time of the full moon a week before. So in these quick monthly cycles, they're really subtle. You don't always notice the lunation phases, but there's this very subtle, like, okay, we've done what we came to do this month, and we're beginning to think about what's next. And in order to do that, of course, you have to kind of let go. But this is an interesting letting go because it's conjunct Jupiter, a benefic, and also Uranus as it sweeps by. It collects up the light of those two planets. And the moon is said to be exalted in the sign of Taurus. So generally speaking, it's like lunar things are lifted up. They're working well. They're representing things that are kind of social or abundance or just positive in general. It's sort of like I always think of the exalted moon as kind of like that moment where springtime, it just blooms and there's beautiful flowers and it's like, it's springtime again, and the winter's over, and everything just feels like fresh and new and hopeful. And you definitely get that quality when the moon is conjunct Jupiter. And of course, with it sweeping by Uranus, you get kind of that wily characteristic that just would do something maybe radical. But this is an interesting combination because you're mixing sort of the springtime newness with the subtle oldness of the lunation phase. So what I take from this is that there might be a symbolic message here that says, if you let go, if you release something, if something isn't working, or if you're just looking ahead, good things come from that, because it's like there's this positive omen that here's the moon conjunct Jupiter. It's like there's abundance if you let go, maybe of what you have or what you did or what what you're working on some level. There's kind of an abundance as soon as the hand opens to release, sort of vibe. You know what I mean? So that is on August the 8th. Now, if we go to August the 9th, the next day, we are getting Venus square Uranus as she enters combustion. So we're back to the Venus retrograde story. Now Venus is invisible, and Venus comes into contact with Uranus. She makes that square, but she also does this precisely. This is the interesting part, precisely as she enters this range of combustion, which is a designation from the ancient world of astrology, where it's about halfway. Venus, she moves out of visibility about 15 degrees ahead of the sun. Now she's about 7 or 8 degrees ahead of the sun. So she's going back towards the sun. And combustion is just sort of what it sounds like. It's like you're so close to the sun, you just like spontaneously combust. So that symbolism that we get from the ancient world, from the ancient astrologers, just lets you know that things are boiling. Venus is getting really hot under the collar, and she's feeling it, right? She's in a little bit of heat or boiling water right now. And when you mix that with the square energy contact to Uranus, it's like that's kind of intense, So if the Venus retrograde cycle is starting to represent things that are kind of unraveling on some level somehow, or in some area, this is where it begins to get a little more intense, right? But with the characteristics of Venus in Leo, Uranus, and that combustion, you get things like prima donnas. That's sort of one of the words that I thought would kind of go with this, prima donna, which is just kind of like self-importance that goes a little too far. So that's the omen. Is we have to be really careful that when we feel that Venus square Uranus energy, that whatever it is that we are ascribing to some kind of important image or ideal for our lives, there's this kind of tension that wants to break free and escape, and especially if Venus is getting hot under the collar, it's like there might be a situation. It almost reminds me of like I got to get out of here. This socially is just too much for me, or like it's almost like have you ever dated somebody that's been really clingy and it's starting to drive you crazy after a while? This is almost like that, where it's like feeling like, yeah, man, I just got to get out of here. This isn't what I want right now. And it has that kind of desperation or prima donna, like I'm going to act on what's really important to me because that's what really matters, and and it almost has that I hate to say the word party kind of vibe, but it's almost like YOLO. You know what I mean? It just has that, I got to do me, I got to break out, I got to do this thing. And it's not the most advantageous time to YOLO, because we have a Venus under combustion, so it's easy for things to not turn out okay. Not that it's going to be the worst thing in the world, but it's just there are times where we do things and we sort of skate by and it doesn't amount to anything, and then there are other times where we do something and it's almost like, wow, it's a shock that you reacted that way or somebody else reacted in a certain way. This has that potential, not that it will necessarily maybe for everybody, but for some people that YOLO will sort of backfire in their face, I think at this point. It could be experimentally bad is another keyword I have for this. You want to experiment, try something new, but combustion makes it an omen that says it might not work out so great, Key ideas: if you love something, set it free. That's a little bit of sort of the energy with this as well. Okay, and if we roll the clock forward to August the 10th here, just the next day, Oh, I'm sorry. I never rolled the clock forward to August the 9th. Okay, so here's this image of August the 9th where we get Venus square, the perfection between Venus and Uranus in a square. Okay, August the 10th here, we get Mercury enters an exaltation degree after perfecting a Jupiter trine. This one is really amazing. I mean, this is just an amazing moment. So in ancient astrology, Mercury, every planet had a sign that they were exalted in. Every planet had a sign that they, or two signs. Most planets had signs, two signs that they called home, except for the sun and moon, who just had one home. But except for the sun and moon, every other planet had a feminine home and a masculine home, or you could think of it as a nighttime home and a daytime home. And this is Mercury's nighttime home in Virgo here. But within each place that a planet was exalted in, that's a whole different sign usually, except for Mercury. Mercury shares a domicile with an exaltation place. He's the only planet to do that, by the way, he, she. But they also had specific degrees that were said to be the exalted degree within the exalted sign. So for Mercury, this is 15 degrees of Virgo. So to be honest, I've never noticed anything different about a planet walking through the exact exalted degree or depressed degree of a sign. Sometimes I feel that with the moon's depression degree at 3 degrees of Scorpio. I feel that sometimes, but I have not noticed myself personally anything different or special or extra good or anything like that with exalted planets in exalted degrees. So I'll say that right off the bat. But it's still interesting to note that the ancient astrologers, for some reason, they designated specific degrees, and that's probably based on observations of like the Chaldean order of planets or something like that. I forget exactly why it is like that, but this would be a good day just to see if you notice anything interesting and drop it in the comments, because I'm going to be looking out for that extra special feeling this day when Mercury moves into the exalted specific degree 15 within Virgo. But what's crazy to me is that that's already special. I would already have been kind of like checking the vibes that day to see what it felt like, or if I noticed anything like that. But what's really, really special is that here's Jupiter in Taurus at 14 and a half degrees. So there's a trine between Mercury and Jupiter while Mercury goes through the exaltation degree. So that's really special. I think in this case, you probably will feel something extra special, but it's hard to say if it'll just be, the action of the trine energy with Jupiter, because Jupiter is a benefic. So we tend to think of Jupiter as being really supportive, giving good things to Mercury, just bringing general good fortune to whatever Mercury is doing. Now, one interesting part of the month I haven't mentioned before is that Mercury and Mars are in sort of a pursuit. Mars is being pursued by Mercury. Mercury's trying her best to catch up Mars all month long. So there's this close proximity that gets more intensified as the month goes on. Now, Mercury this month stations and turns retrograde. So Mars actually escapes the exchange of conjunction. And so the perfection between Mercury, which would normally happen because Mercury is a faster planet than Mars, doesn't actually happen. So that's one interesting signature of the month as well. And you can see that Mercury by this point is about 4.5 degrees away from Mars. So they're getting pretty close to a conjunction already by this point. But one interesting thing is that trine energy that happens. So some key words or ideas for this is going to be a fertile mind, right? Jupiter has that connection to things that are fertile, and Jupiter makes things grow or brings the rain or the summer wind that helps things grow. Jupiter is connected with things like sperm and fertility. So you have like a fertile mind or big ideas or an endless imagination. But now some of the ways that the aspect energy can go too far, because any aspect energy can go too far, even if it's something good like a trine. Are things like boastfulness with this aspect, or arrogance. I picked the word Scientology. Now, I know a lot of people watching probably have nothing to do with Scientology, but when you get religion mixed with science, right? Jupiter representing religion, Mercury representing science. It's just kind of an example of a little bit of the essence or the quintessence of an aspect between Jupiter and Mercury. Sometimes has that kind of like, it's religious, but it's also has something really, really um, uh, like scientific, right? Or data driven or something like that. So you get kind of that vibe of like, well, we believe in something sciency. So another way, you could say Scientology, but another way that this might be expressed is I could see at this time, if there weren't things happening in the world like people taking, the environment or climate change or something like that, could be like more of a serious topic at this point, right? Like we are believing in something sciency. What could that be? So you get things like religious texts is another way you could read this, because of course it's like you get the religiosity of Jupiter, but then you get the like the actual words of Mercury. So things like religious texts, wisdom and judgment, convincing words, salesmanship, generous compliments, overstimulation, chatterbox, lucky money, gambling, winning, clever success of fortune. These are all different characteristics and keywords that came up for this particular aspect. Okay, now if we roll the real-time clock forward to August the 12th, a couple days later, we get the Balsamic Moon phase beginning. Again, this is kind of a subtle energy within the month. These lunation phases, you don't always notice them real strongly. But for me, it's just kind of interesting to track them because this month especially, what's interesting is that the Balsamic Moon begins in the sign of the moon's temple of Cancer. So we get this very, very soft, gentle energy that is pretty lovely. Balsamic Moon, this is the way I always think about a Balsamic Moon energy. Everybody has their own different ways that they think about these things, but the way that I imagine a Balsamic Moon is kind of a mixture between Halloween night, where there's just a lot of magic and darkness and mystery. You got the moon that is in its last phase before it changes into a new moon. So it's really dying out, and it has that crone magic, dark Halloween, not Halloween like in the sense of something being scary per se, but just that very magical dark quality to it. And it's like that mixed with having to go meet somebody in a hospital that is probably going to pass, and it's like you're going to receive what is left. You're going to have an exchange about what is left. It's like there's a seeding for the future that is imminent. And when you are at the end, it's soft and sweet and tender and emotional. So this has definitely that quality of being really soft and sweet and tender, emotional, some transmission that is almost out of the ordinary and sort of comes in. It's a really special moment. And I'll share with you something personal that sort of maybe captures a little bit of this essence, I think. If you guys have been watching my videos, you know that I had an appendix that hadn't ruptured, but it was going to rupture. So I went to the emergency room a couple of weeks ago, and I had an appendicitis. So they, of course, took it out. And, it's a very routine operation. The doctor comes in and he says, look, I just have to tell you, the scans look like that's what it is. It makes the most sense, but we could get in there and we could be totally wrong, and we could have to think on our feet. And, we're doing surgery. Like there's always a chance that something could go amiss. It's 99% sure it's not, but anytime you do surgery, it's dangerous. There's a level of danger there and unpredictability that you can't always predict, right? So he's giving me this speech like, look, you can die in surgery, you can bleed out, something can go wrong. It's probably not going to happen, and it's most likely won't happen. But I have to tell you, that's sort of the disclaimer. Like, we're going to do this, and there's risk, basically. And it was at that point that a couple of things really started hitting me. And one of them was that, because I asked the doctor, I said, look, in the ancient world, like, because I'm always thinking about ancient astrology, in the ancient world, they wouldn't have been able to take this out. This would have killed me, would have ruptured, and I would have, this would have been my end. And the doctor said, yeah. So I keep thinking about this. I'm now on camera right now, alive. I'm living past my natural time. I'm living past, if I would have went to an ancient astrologer in the ancient world and I was alive then, and I would have said, hey, can you give me, I want to pay you to do a length of life treatment from my natal birth chart, which is something that they did. Very important back then for people to find out, like, how long are you going to live for? Somehow they would have said now, or like 2 weeks ago. That's it. That's all you have. I've only made it this far. My body would not have carried me naturally past that moment. So this really, this put me into a pretty emotional state. Plus I'm in pain. I've never had surgery before. This is the first time I've ever done this. So it was a pretty powerful moment for me. I wasn't scared, but it was definitely emotional. And I thought, I'm just sitting here. My partner went back home to get some things for me in case I had to stay. And I decided, I'm going to write some things out. And just in case something goes wrong, I want my son and my daughter to have something. I want my partner to have something. People that I love to have something. So I just wrote something out just in case things went bad. This is like that. This has that vibe to it. Not that things will go bad, because I actually think that they won't. The moon in the sign of Cancer is almost like things going well. It's like emotions that work out, or family time that is really precious or special. But it has that quality of not necessarily the fear or the things going bad about the hospital situation like that. But it has that sweet and soft, tender quality to it. When my partner got back, I read to her what I had written, and I said, give this to Hailey, whatever, tell him this, whatever. And of course I had stuff in there for her, and I wanted her to know that I loved her and all of that. Sorry, this is a long story about this, but this moment for me, it's very, very subtle. It might go by unnoticed. You don't always notice lunation moments like this, but if you do, I think it sort of has that really tender quality to it. Okay, well, let's move on. And we will go to August the 13th now. And this is the Venus Cazimi with Uranus square moment, or within the Uranus square. So remember, Venus is already within that square to Uranus, but it's at this moment where she is still within 3 degrees of that aspect to Uranus that she actually makes it to the heart of the sun. So here's Venus at 20. Here's the sun at 21. So this is, now we're halfway through the retrograde cycle for Venus, and Venus has gone through the difficulty. Not that it's all completely easy after this, but Venus is now conjoining the sun, and there is a real powerful moment for Venus. Whenever you get retrogrades, there's always this moment where there's the Cazimi. And it's empowering because the planet, as the planet conjoins the sun gives that planet the royal powers of the solar quality. It's almost like Venus becomes like a sun. She's like a Venus sun. So she has real power here. She's reborn. It's like something is being it's like that moment of conception almost. It's not necessarily like a seeding moment like we would think of a new moon. It's more of like the moment that God or light or life comes into. It's like there's life is there all of a sudden. It's that instantaneous moment of like new life for Venus. So Venus is reborn. She has the power and authority of the sun, but when planets go through their retrograde phases like this, they always are imparted with that solar quality that's really powerful and special. But doing so while the sun is within his own temple, and that planet is of course within the sun's temple, is extra special. There's extra solarness to it, So this is a really special moment. By the time we're nearing the middle of the month here, we get the second half of the retrograde for Venus beginning at this moment, and this is where she begins to recover or improve. At this point, she is reborn, so there is new impetus for Venus, and she's carrying the light of the sun, so she might make something powerful happen at this time. And, of course, just from the standpoint of like what's advantageous for us down here on planet Earth, this is symbolically the moment where it's like, okay, we've made it through usually the worst part of the retrograde, if it has been bad or if things have been coming up. This is usually the time where the recovery begins after this. So a lot of times the ancient astrologers will liken retrograde planets to people falling ill. This is the time where it's like you're still sick, but you're beginning to recover now. So Venus is beginning to recover, and this is a powerful moment. I have some keywords for this that I think is that are interesting, just sort of coming up with words that are combining the qualities of the sign and the planet. I have one that I think is really kind of a fun one to think about, coronation, because of course this is Venus in the temple of the sun, and the sun is the king or the royal planet, right? One of the royal planets. So you have kind of like Venus reborn. It almost reminds me of like a queen's coronation, like Queen Elizabeth. If you watch that coronation that she had when she was young, it's almost like that, right? It's Venus, which connects to that beauty. So beauty is reborn, right? But beauty is not only reborn, beauty is reborn in almost like a royal kind of way, which is really interesting, right? So coronation, or to adorn with light. That's actually one of the etymological roots of the word coronation. It has I think we use words like a corona, right, for the sun. I think I'm saying that right. But to adorn with light, Venus is adorning or wrapping herself in a cloak of the sun's power, majesty, and light at this moment. So very powerful moment, of course, for Venus. So you just extrapolate that to anything Venusian: friendship, love, harmony, beauty, pleasure, artistic qualities, things that are important, that are aesthetic or are relational in nature. All of those things are becoming adorned with light, or wrapped or cloaked in the sun's power and light. So you have things like just simply like ceremony. This could be a type of energy where if you're getting together with friends or family, or you're having like a barbecue, it just feels like there's almost something like ceremonial about it. Unorthodox coronations. Here we bring in the Uranus component as well, where it's like, I remember, when I was watching The Crown, I remember that it was Prince Philip. He wanted to bring in cameras to the ceremony. I think it was the Queen's coronation. And there were all sorts of things like he didn't want to, I forget, but he had problems with the outdatedness of the ceremony, and he wanted to bring in television to let the world in on it, people that couldn't be there. And there was this, of course, to the orthodoxy that had always had coronation ceremonies the same way. This was incredibly like outside the box and unusual. So there could be that really unusual quality that happens as well, mixed in with the whole royal Venus vibes, because of course we're getting still that energy off of the Uranus square. So it could be things like unusual parties or social moments could be coming in at this time. Okay, now if we roll the clock forward to August the 16th here, excuse Excuse me. On August the 16th, we get the new moon in Leo. And of course, because the sun and Venus are really, really close to this square with Uranus, the new moon is also square to Uranus. So that is, of course, an unusual or interesting energy to have with a new moon. Let me just roll the clock back a few hours. So the moon's in the same sign here, but there we go. So we get a new moon approximately pretty late central London time. It's about 11 p.m. or so. So adjust that to where your time zone is, but pretty late on August the 15th or 16th, early, we get the new moon in Leo. And that interesting connection that the new moon has, where we think of new moons as the beginning of a new cycle and the seeding of something, or and new moons often have this quality of like, you don't even know what it is yet. It's so young. It's like you're sort of unaware of what it is, but nonetheless, it's sort of instinctually beginning to sprout at that time, right? But some keywords I have for this are revolutionary royalty or futuristic legacy. Leo is concerned with legacy. So what new forms of legacy might we be thinking about at the time of this new seeding for the new moon? No time to waste. That's another one. Time to evaluate. Because at the same time that the new moon is coming through, one thing that you can also do to try to get a sense of what lunation cycles are doing is, of course, see what are the other transits happening simultaneous to this. So one thing that is of note at this time is that while the new moon is happening in the sign of Leo, this is also the day where Mercury and Mars are in their closest proximity to one another. So essentially, Mercury has been chasing Mars. Mars is actually cruising pretty fast in the sign of Virgo, which is interesting because when I think of Mars in Virgo has that quality of just really just like unstoppable, gotta go, projects to be done. I get that because if you've ever known any Virgo sun sign people, a lot of times it's like, I love Virgo sun sign energy because it's so amiable most of the time. It's just so positive. It's like they have jobs on their way to their jobs a lot of times. It's like they can be very helpful, very attentive, very amiable, very friendly, and it's just real positive. Like I work with a Virgo sun sign, and he's absolutely the most positive person ever. He's just like, if you're going to do it right. And why not help somebody else out if you can during the days? Like if there's a way I can help somebody, why aren't I going to do it that way? Kind of an energy. Mars is very much like that. It's like, I'm going to give it to you whether you want it or not. I'm going to help you whether you want it or not. Very fast, very quick. In Mercury's temple, Mercury has been chasing Mars all month long so far, but Mercury is losing steam at this moment because she is preparing her slowdown and station one, as they used to call it. Sometimes the ancient astrologers used to call it station one, which is the station to turn retrograde. So Mercury is in the slowdown now and Mars is pulling ahead. He can't wait. He can't stop. He's got to go. Mercury is beginning to lose momentum now. So this new moon is interesting because it is happening at a time where there's something instinctually budding inside of us that may have to do with legacy or be centrally important to our lives, something that is transcendent or supersedes normal mundane stuff. That's like, it's really, really important that we begin looking at this because when I think about like for me personally, knowing that I'm living past my natural life has naturally led me to take a look at certain things and be like, do I really need to get concerned with this, or should I get concerned with this? What is really of that central importance? The new moon in Leo speaks to those things that are bringing us back to something that is very, above all of the other mundane kinds of things, superficial things. Now, with Venus also co-present with the new moon, there may be a little bit more superficiality coming in at this time. But you get a lot of that similar quality with the new moon in Cancer. Both for me, new moons in Cancer and Leo, or full moons in Cancer and Leo, have that like, what's really important about living? Is it really about all of these little things that we have to do? Yeah, to some degree, because without doing these little things, like nothing really is functional. But it's not all or only about that, right? There's something deeper there. And for me, the new moon is that instinct that sort of gets us back. Like, I've always wanted to write a book. Well, maybe now is the time to finally begin, something like that. Something that leads to legacy. And for some people, that's just children. So this could be getting children back to school, preparing them, preparing our future generation for re-entering a new year of education, or things like that become important. But it's also seated by a planet that is exalted, lifted up high, Mercury, in very good dignity, but beginning to lose steam a little bit. Can't quite catch Mars. Mars is out of here, right? He's like a baseball heading for, the fence. So very interesting energy. And if we roll the clock forward to August the 22nd here now, on August the 22nd, so we take quite a jump here. But on August the 22nd, Venus walks into a square with Jupiter. There's actually a couple of things. This is a pretty big day in the month because Venus squares Jupiter, Mars opposes Neptune, and Mercury is at station 1. Mercury is stopped in the sky. So a lot of things happening all at once in the chart. So when you combine all of these things, I get things like, you remember that Beatles song that Ringo sung on, I think it was Sgt. Pepper's album, and it was With a Little Help from My Friends. Yeah, I get that. You still have Mercury and Mars in helpful Virgo. You get a Venus square Jupiter, Venus in recovery now, on the mend, moving every day to a better and better position, and now getting some aspectual reception from Jupiter in Taurus. Even though by square, it's still beneficial. So you get the sense that there is support coming at this time, either through friends, friendships, partnerships, relationships. It's as if, let's say that there were things that you worked out with a partner during the Venus retrograde, and that's what the Venus retrograde was all about. Or let's say that you worked out a career transition during the Venus retrograde. This is the moment where it's like the dust has settled and things are beginning to sprout anew. There's something positive and new, that springtime Jupiter energy that's providing abundance or growth or good fortune is somehow contacting Venus, like mending. It's like somebody comes back with your medicine that you needed, or, you're beginning to get on your feet at a new job and not be quite so raw and new, it's something like that. But Mercury is also at station 1. She is preparing to turn retrograde. So you also get, I get some help. I'm getting maybe some help from friends or loved ones. I'm feeling supported, but there's also like a loss of momentum, not only because Mercury is at station 1, but because Mars is in opposition to Neptune. And Mars opposed Neptune energy definitely has that quality sometimes of either being like almost like Joan of Arc spiritual, like you're on a quest of some kind of religious or spiritual or important quest, like what was it? I want to say like a purpose, like you're driven towards a purpose. But the other way that Mars opposite Neptune can definitely express or symbolically represent is a weakening of that martial energy. It's just kind of like, I'm just feeling blah. I just don't have it today. I just want to be a couch potato today. And so when you combine a few things here, when you combine Mercury slowing down, sort of losing momentum, when you combine Mars opposed Neptune, which already has that inbuilt-in sort of blah quality to it. The other thing that is interesting is that this aspect with Mars is preceding Mars's entrance into the sign of Libra, a place where Mars is in detriment. So Mars is okay in Virgo, pretty happy in Virgo, but Mars loses some of that momentum. So there's a shift here where you can Marsy things begin to shift at this point. And I think that this is the omen for that when Mars meets that watery god Neptune, right? It's almost like there's a little bit of water that's sort of splashed on your fire a little bit. Mercury slowing down. So with a little help from my friends, losing momentum, things like this. Now, if we roll the clock forward to the next day, August the 23rd, okay, August the 22nd, we get Mercury at station 1. August the 23rd, Venus emerges into visibility and the sun enters Virgo. This is a really interesting combination of events. You know, I know I say that for almost everything, but truly it is. And for me, it's because it's because Venus is emerging into visibility. So now things become visible, which means that Venusian things can now they're more functional. So if you try to do something Venusian, if you try to paint a picture at this point, or tell somebody that it's really important for you to do X, Y, and Z, or that you really love them, or something like this, whatever Venus expresses at this point, it's seen, it's noticed, it's visible, it carries recovery along with it, and in a way that is more effective than it used to be when she was in the invisible world. But the caveat to this is that it's not completely easy, because the sun enters Virgo, and that's important because the sun is Venus's host. Venus is in the sun's temple. So signs that are adjacent to each other don't see each other. So in one level, Venus is more functional, or things work out better for her symbolically. But on another level, she doesn't have the resources of the sun. The sun is not providing things that Venus necessarily needs. So, for instance, the example that I was taught by my teacher is like, if you're Venus, you're in the sun's home. You're not at home. You don't know where everything is. You don't have access to all your Venus-y stuff, like your instruments, your art supplies, things like that. So if Venus says, I'm feeling better, I'm feeling really great, I'm healing, I don't feel sick anymore, I'm starting to recover pretty nicely now, I wish I could paint something or draw something or whatever. And it's like Venus is looking around, but she's not home. She's looking in the sun's temple, and she's like, where the heck are the art supplies? And she tries to call the sun and say, hey, sun, I don't know where you are, but when you come back, can you help me find these art supplies? Do you have art supplies? I don't even know. And the sun is out of reception. He is out of service. He's next door. He can't see. He can't help. He's not going to help. He's sort of indifferent. So things somehow are more functional because Venus is moving into visibility, but somehow not functional because she loses host relationship, co-presence with the sun, who up until this point has been with her the whole time, supporting her through her difficulty or her sickness the whole time. Excuse me. So very nuanced, interesting, and not completely easy, even though we're seeing Venus recover. So that's an interesting moment. And then, of course, an ingress of the sun into Virgo brings that quality of a heightening end towards the summer, right? There's this instinct that the sun says, the sun is always about knowledge. And it's the kind of knowledge that is, in my opinion, is really, really internalized. It's different than the moon's instinct, but it's more about the wisdom or the knowledge that is sort of filling the mind with light. And it's almost like in a chart, the sun almost represents like your natural talent. Like if you're just really good at something, how do you know how to be good at that thing or when other people struggle? For me, it's like the sun. That's what the sun does. What is the sun's talent in Virgo? The sun's talent in Virgo is it has really one, in my opinion, purpose. And that purpose is to say the summer doesn't last forever. Light will fade, darkness will come, cold will come. What do we have to do to get ready for all of that? What food do we need to store? What projects need to be completed and wrapped up in time? What careful, critical judgments do we have to look at? People always criticize Virgos for being critical. Well, you need critical discernment to figure the future out, right? And if the future is heading towards darkness, that metaphorical darkness that is represented by the sun's fall as he crosses into the sign of Libra next month, you need that. One interesting thing about Virgo is that Venus is said to be depressed or fallen in the sign of Virgo. The way that I have always looked at that is because Venus represents, for me, kind of let's have fun, let's enjoy life, let's bring in some artistic quality to it. Let's, lie on the blanket in a grassy meadow on a nice day and bring the grapes and wine and spend time with your loved one, while listening to music. It's like all these Venusian things, but there isn't time for that so much in Virgo. At least that's what the sun feels, I think. The sun feels like that was last month. You laid on the grass last month, you grew the corn, you watched it grow, you had late summer nights. It was fun. There were bonfires. It was great. We can do a little bit of that, but only after the work is done. Like that will not last. We are heading towards something darker. So an interesting changeover in the middle of the month here. Especially when Mercury is stationing the pole backwards. Now Mercury is the host of the sun. So Mercury is trying to provide some resource or trying to take care of the sun and Mars. But how good can Mercury do that if he is stopped? If Mercury is stopped, it's like Mercury is ambivalent. Mercury, who is very clever and quick in Virgo, all of a sudden begins to wonder, do I have all of the questions? I don't know. And one key idea I had for this is like Mercury's taking care of people in his home, but he's sort of like confused or dazed. And he's kind of like, almost reminds me of like back in the day when I was young and everybody in my generation smoked weed, right? And it was very, very in my generation, Generation X, it was like if you were 14, it wasn't even a question whether you smoked or didn't smoke, in the place that I grew up. So it almost reminds me of that. Like, it's like all of a sudden Mercury goes from this very clever, clear-headed, minded place where he knows where he's going. And now he's slowed down and he's become ambivalent. He's not sure where we're going. And he's driving he's driving his guests around. They're in the car and he's like stoned and lost or all of a sudden, and now he doesn't know. That's a little bit of Mercury. Mercury loses some answers at this time. Or it might be that Mercury's still very, very clever and understands that there needs to be a moment where we think. We need some time to stop and think. That's sort of the omen of Mercury stationing in exaltation, in my opinion. Okay, so if we roll the clock forward now to August the 24th, we are going to get the Sagittarius first quarter moon, and Mercury is actually retrograde at this point. It's a pretty quick transition from station to retrograde for Mercury. But we get the first quarter moon in the sign of Sagittarius, which of course is a pretty cool first quarter moon. First quarter moons, they're kind of like the builder moon. What do you want to build? It's time to take action. What do you have to do to differentiate yourself from the environment? There's that tension of action. There needs to be something that gets going at this point. And in Jupiter's temple of Sagittarius, it could be optimistic, it could be adventurous, it could be risk taking. So you get that sort of I'm going to start this thing, and it's okay if it's risky. It's okay if it fails. I think it'll work. It has that kind of quality to it. But with everything that's going on with Mercury and the new Virgo sun, and just with the other planets involved, it seems like there's kind of like a going back to the drawing board kind of moment. We're going to stop. We're going to think about something. Mercury is retrograde. But if we stop and think and we start something anew, or we redo something, or we relaunch something, or whatever it is, let's do it bigger this time. Let's do it better. We're hopeful. We're optimistic that it could be better. So I think that this is a moment during the month where, we're pausing to some degree. We're really critically analyzing. We know we should analyze something very critically. We're sort of taking a pause to think analytically about it. Now it's like we want to start something. We want to do it big. Maybe we got to redo something, but we're going to do it in a bigger, better way, because it is the first quarter moon in Jupiter sign of Sagittarius. So we're going to do it big, right? Now, if we go ahead to August the 27th, let me roll the clock forward here. August the 27th, we're getting now towards the end of the month. We are going to get the Sun opposed Saturn and Mars enters Libra day. So this really begins to change the energy. Of course, now the Sun is in Virgo. His talent is to critically become aware of all the details. And he walks into an opposition with Saturn, which Mars encountered, so now the Sun opposes Saturn. The Sun walks into that opposition. And this is like, not only are we thinking critically ahead for the future, but there's a little bit of more ambivalence that is piled on with the Mercury retrograde to some degree. Some of the ways I described this in terms of keywords were things like ideal versus reality. That's a big one, because if you think about where Saturn is, if you think about where the Sun is being very practical. But Saturn is also a very practical planet. But Saturn in Jupiter's sign of Pisces, going retrograde himself, it's like it's like there is this sense of what is real, what can be saved, what is heavy emotionally, what do we want to hold on to, maybe, or like, what do we want to hold on that we're hopeful for the future about, which is kind of an odd combination. But you know, like I always think of Kurt Cobain when I think of Saturn in Pisces. Kurt Cobain had Saturn in Pisces natally. He was born with that combination. But you know, it's like when you listen to Nirvana music, if you listen to Nirvana music before, which a lot of people have, there's that very interesting like pessimism mixed with hopefulness, right? And you get that Saturn in Pisces thing. So the ideal versus reality, that is really what is being checked out at this time. Life and death. We have the Sun preparing for the underworld. We have Saturn trying to get to a springtime. An odd combination, you might say. Weakened vitality. That is, of course, just one basic one outside of the planets in the signs that they're in. Whenever you get the Sun opposed Saturn, you're going to potentially run into a weakness of vitality. There's a limiting of that vital solar energy on some level. Rash fairness. That could also be something that is really important. That's because this is also the same time that Mars enters Libra. So you get a combination of what is Mars like in the sign of Libra. Well, Mars can be rash, impulsive, wants to take action, shoot from the hip, all that sort of things. But he's concerned or filtering that quality through the fairness of Libra. So you get like, it's like somebody doesn't take the time to really consider what is fair. Now, this is mitigated by the Sun in Virgo and Mercury in Virgo, who are definitely going to curb that quite a bit, almost probably down to nothing. But nonetheless, there could be moments where Mars expresses in a way that's sort of just, well, I need to make a judgment right now, and I'm not even going to think about it. I'm just going to do it. It's like, okay, do this. You know, do you want to do this or that? Do this. Do you want to Should this person get that, or should I ground my son or let him play the game? Should I, whatever it is that has to be judged or weighed or chosen. Libra, the place where the sun is in fall, the sun is a planet that selects or chooses things. These are the qualities of Libra. There's an ambivalence toward choice. With Mars in Libra, there could be moments where you just make a decision because you don't want to think about it. It's just like, whatever, just do it. Just take some action. Let's make a judgment. Go for it. There's that rashness towards fairness or impulsive judgment quality. Also, Mars in the sign of Libra could be like the destroyer of peace, right? Because Mars is in the sign of his detriment, meaning that Mars is opposite to one of his temples of Aries, right? So Mars is as far away from one of his natural places. Mars likes to be Aryan. Mars's nature is to be Aryan, to be the ram that is in competition or battle with another ram that is fighting for mating rights at the beginning of springtime. Mars in the sign of the sun's fall of Libra doesn't feel right there. And when Mars doesn't feel right, sometimes he destroys or cuts away or severs or separates. So there could be like, if Mars gets frustrated while traveling through the sign of Libra for the next month or so, the destroyer of peace could come in. It's like, there's rashness. It's like, I don't care. I don't care who's right or wrong. I'm making this choice. I don't want to think about it. And it might lead to like a situation where it's like, well, if we would have taken a little more time to make that choice, then maybe the peace would have remained intact. But that's sort of Mars in Libra, the sign ruled by Venus, a sign of peace. Normally, Mars doesn't do so well there. Not that there's it's all bad, but Mars doesn't do as well there because there's something antithetical to Marsy things in the sign of Venus's temple of Libra, in the sun's place of depression or fall. So that is a pretty big energy shift there. By the time we get to August the 29th here, Mercury, which is a bit of a faster planet going through retrograde cycles, Mercury is already, she has already stationed, she has already began moving backwards. Now she gets within that 15-degree range of the sun. And it's the same thing that we talked about with Venus, where now Mercury becomes invisible. So this is such an interesting combination. Interesting for me, because what do you get when you have a planet that is exalted while at the same time retrograde, weak by retrogradation, invisible, not being, not symbolically at a moment that things tend to work out in the open or are effective somehow or visible. Just such an interesting combination, as is most of the time with anything in astrology. But some ways I chose to describe this by keywords are calculating in private, right? Mercury still has ability to some degree because she is exalted, but she's weak and exalted. So there could be like calculating in private. Powerful classified information. It's just kind of a fun one, but I get that almost archetype of like the CIA, and this is kind of trippy. I didn't think about this until just now, but the whole thing in the news lately where both President Biden and President Trump are being criticized for having taken classified documents home, or outside of the White House office. That could be almost like fits this theme pretty perfectly, you might say, but powerful because it's Mercury exalted, classified because Mercury's invisible, and information. There's combination at work there with those key words, I would say. Things like spying. I wonder if this is a time where it's like there's a good spy movie that comes out, like almost like another James Bond kind of a movie, something great, something a little bit fallen or weak, but in something kind of invisible or about working or operating outside of the realm of visibility is what you get. So things like giving a great speech that no one will hear. That's when Mercury becomes invisible. You might have something really good to say. It might be really important. You might even say it really, really well with Mercury exalted, but it, it lands on deaf ears. It doesn't quite get picked up or received as effectively as it could have. This could also be with the sun in Virgo. It's like save your money for a rainy day. Mercury can sometimes represent financial things like money or trade or valuables that are exchanged or ideas that are exchanged. So it's almost like instead of things being exchanged so rapidly now, that sense of like, maybe we should hold back, maybe we should save the money for the rainy day kind of a vibe. So this could be just a good time where it's advantageous to just not spend, save money, things like that. Rethink a financial plan or the future of your 401k or just things like that. Okay, and we get finally to the end of the month here. We get to August the 31st, and this is going to be the second full moon that we have for the month. The full moon in the sign of Pisces. Let me roll the clock back by hours here to get the exact full moon here. So this is probably August the 30th to August the 31st, depending on where you are. But yeah, right around, actually, this is more like August the 30th. I don't know why I put the 31st. So maybe ignore the date on this though, but there we are. August the 30th, about 3:40 p.m. London time, we get the full moon coming through. So you just adjust according to your time zone here. But we get a full moon where the sun is at 7 degrees Virgo and the moon is at 7 degrees of Pisces. And I like Pisces full moons because, of course, we're getting a full moon, very different from the full moon that we had at the beginning of the month where it's happening in a Saturn ruled sign. Saturn is in aversion, doesn't see the moon or support the moon. This is a much, much different vibe because not only is the full moon taking place in a Jupiter ruled sign, a planet that was said to be a benefic, the greater benefic, but also check it out. Here is Jupiter in Taurus, 60, roughly, 2 signs away, which is the sextile aspect whole sign. They're not really in a degree-based exact aspect, but remember that the moon has a wider orb than other planets, where we typically use 3 degrees for the range of engagement or orb for other planets. The moon, because the moon is the fastest moving, quote unquote, astrological planet, we can give the moon a wider range because within a day, the moon travels about 12 to 15 degrees. If you extend out the orb of the moon to 12 degrees or so, the moon definitely is receiving an inferior sextile from her host Jupiter in the sign of Taurus. So that is pretty advantageous for the moon. There is one caveat, is that the moon sweeps by Saturn right before or right after entering the sign of Pisces and becoming full. So there is definitely some of that Saturnine energy that, in my opinion, it's sort of almost been repressed the whole time. It seems like a lot of the month, whenever planets make aspects to Saturn, it's like that planet somehow, I feel like, is overcoming or is somehow in the stronger position. Saturn being retrograde and sort of on his own at this part of the sky, all alone, which Saturn actually likes to be kind of all alone. But so, there could be a little bit of that melancholic Saturn in Pisces full moon energy that sort of dampens things down a little bit. But there could also be a very hopeful kind of full moon energy where if things have gone well over the last couple of weeks, as the moon has been waxing, if things have been improving or going well or shifting and changing in ways that feel good, this is going to be kind of like a relief, like, okay, it's going to work out. And so for that reason, I like Pisces full moons a lot. And we're going to get probably some key ideas or words that are connected to things like a hopeful harvest, because the sun is in Virgo and the sun is concerned with harvesting, and the sun is throwing that harvesting light to the moon. And the moon is hopeful in Jupiter's sign and has reception to Jupiter and all of that. So there's kind of like a hopeful harvest. It's almost like, I feel like this is almost maybe an omen that says, you know, all right, we're separating the wheat from the chaff at this time of the year. We're getting ready to enter the dark half of the year. How did we do? How are things weighing out at this time? It seems like it could be hopeful, a hopeful harvest. Artistic exhibition, full moon energies, just in general, right, are sort of about being seen or on show. Now that could be dampened a little bit by Saturn, being the light of Saturn being collected by the full moon before she becomes completely full. But there's definitely that artistic expression with the full moon. It's like, I'm not just feeling artistic. I want to go to an art gallery right now and be out and seen and visible and doing something artistic or creative, or, you know, something like that. Dedicated redemption. That is probably the most interesting part of this is dedicated redemption, because that Saturn energy comes in and says, you know, we are sticking with tradition, or we are sticking with responsibility, or we are doing something, you know, duty bound, but we're duty bound in a way that is somehow hopeful. So a pretty specific but interesting kind of vibe, I think, with the full moon for sure. Okay, guys. Well, that is the astrology for the month of August, our astrology overview. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. Please leave in the comments below what you guys think of some of these transits, or are looking forward to, or maybe are feeling anxious about. And we'll be back again on Monday for another astrology video. We'll start diving each week now into some of the specific transits that are happening throughout the specific weeks within the month as we go forward here on the channel. I appreciate you guys watching. I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.